All right. Hi, everybody. Welcome. Welcome to all that are coming today. My name is Akira Brand. I'm joined here with Aubrey King. We are so excited that you are here every time. So, Aubrey, do you want to kick us off and kind of just tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Sure, absolutely. I'm Aubrey King. I'm so used to saying that I'm a solutions engineer from F5, but I am no longer a solutions engineer. I was a 12-year pre-sales engineer for F5, and now I have made the switch to move over to become a community evangelist for Dev Central, which is our 20-year-old user community that we've had some strength in for a very, very long time. It's one of the things that brought me into F5 and like able to use it as a product. And now, I'm there working on it. So loving the community.
Nice. I want to ask you a question, and that question is, what are you most excited about in your work right now?
Um, wow, that's hard. I mean, like you could say a million different things. It could be technology related, as far as security. It could be, lenses that I've got, etc. Working on theme music for shows. I mean, so many new things. But I guess as far as the excitement, I'm most excited about really, I guess, the transformation that is happening in our company, right? I mean, we have really kind of gone from being this hardware sort of juggernaut out there and known for nothing but load balancing to becoming a software company known more for security products in a very short period of time. So it's like it's a really exciting time for me to be covering community at this great time of change. That's got to be the most exciting piece.
Yo, that's so true. Like,
Great
especially
question.
when everything's in flux and you get to kind of be that person that glues and like not necessarily like you have to stitch and hold everything together, but you can be that intermediary and like that translator between like here's what we were, here's what we are now. That's really cool.
Yeah, agreed. Love it.
Nice. Nice.
How
All
about
right.
how about you? You know,
Yeah, what do I do? Who am I? Well,
yeah.
everyone, my name is Akira Brand. I work in developer relations at Bright Security. Here you can see our little fancy logo up here. We are a DAST company, which is one of the reasons that we're having this conversation with Aubrey today is that DAST is our main offering. So that stands for Dynamic Application Security Testing. We're going to get into that a little bit more about what that actually does and what that means for software developers and other people in the AppSec community. What else can I tell you? I have been working here for a little under a year. I really like it. I am kind of similar to Aubrey in that a lot of my job involves communication, right? So I do a lot of teaching. I do things like this kind of webinar. And I'll wrap up briefly my intro by saying two things. One is that I used to be a professional musician, so we may actually jam out at some point. So that would be pretty sweet. And my most exciting thing I'm working on at my job right now is a visual novel to explain the different aspects of AppSec to beginners. So me and my colleague are working on writing and illustrating this entire visual novel, and I'm going to present it at an RSA event in January, and then we're going to publish it. I'm going to use RenPy to build it. I've never used RenPy, so I'm going to learn a lot. I've actually not coded in Python for 4 years, so we'll see what I remember. But apparently RenPy is quite user friendly. So I was inspired by a visual novel called Doki Doki Literature Club. It's a horror game. It's terrifying. It's a wonderful game. And I was like, well, I'm not going to make this scary, but it is going to be really cool. So that's me in a nutshell. So let's jump in then into what DAST is and what WAF is for those of you who may not know. And if you do, this section is not necessarily for you, but we'll make this quick. And then we'll get right into the pros and cons, one versus the other. So Aubrey, would you like to tell us a little bit about what a WAF is and what it does?
Sure. WAF, for those that don't know, stands for Web App Firewall. And recently, there has been a bit of a change in that segment to include API defense. So you may also see the acronym WAP, WAAP, Web App and API Protection. So those two are very, very similar in nature. And so the idea behind a WAF is that you can put up defenses between your users and really your abusers and your application, right? The idea is that no matter what's going on behind there, if we get some criteria that cause us to stop, whether that's a signature or whether that's something that we've learned dynamically from understanding the application over a period of time, we'll meet criteria and stop that traffic going forth towards your application.
Nice. That was short and sweet. I loved it. Well done. Well done. Why do you feel like if someone was coming to a WAF from absolutely no knowledge at all and needed to understand like what can it do like immediately for their applications, like what would be like the 5 second like explain it like I'm five sort of version?
Sure. Well, the easiest thing to do, if you're people discover WAFs a lot of times when they're under attack. They don't even know it exists, and then all of a sudden, oh my gosh, I'm experiencing an application attack. Well, there's a web app firewall thing. Check that box. And so that's something that at F5 we refer to as checkbox WAF. It's a very simple way to get things stopped. It's not very effective, and it usually is something that is able to be done fast, and you feel some impact from that. But typically, an experienced hacker would retool and be able to get around that sort of thing. So the 5 seconds, really, it just you turn it on and it blocks the bad things from hitting your app.
Nice. Right. Okay. Yeah. I love that. Just blocks the bad stuff from hitting your app. It's almost, it's like a
Yes.
literal shield. I like to think of it as cling wrap or something like around a piece of food. I don't know what was just because cling wrap, WAF kind of rhymes. I don't know. And stuff can't get in through the cling wrap. Anyway,
Yeah.
that's my weird experience of WAF.
And
Oh,
so I guess, around the same kind of thing, if you could kind of tell me really what is the base definition here of DAST? Like, what are the expectations?
yeah, for sure. So, like I said earlier, DAST stands for Dynamic Application Security Testing. What a DAST does is it's sort of like an automated pen test, as it were. It doesn't go as deep or like necessarily as targeted as like a hired pen tester with, 10, 20 years of experience or whatever. But it can essentially, what it does is it takes your app and it attacks it from the outside in, the similar way that a pen tester would or a malicious actor would while your application is running. So it's a little bit different from something like a SAST, which is a static code analysis tool that essentially will look at your app's code and analyze the code itself to say, okay, like what vulnerabilities is this code exposing? The DAST will actually look at the app again as it's running and attack it from the outside in as opposed to looking at it from the inside out. It's also called black box testing. I'm actually going to draw a little picture here if we can. Yeah, here we go. So can you guys see my little picture, little screen? Okay, so here's your
Yes.
application. And a SaaS would kind of look at the application from the outside in, right? Or it would look like at the code itself. So wow, there's like a lot of shapes going on right now. I love it. And what a DAS does is it's going to attack it from the outside in like this, but it doesn't look at the code, right? This right here is all a black box. You absolutely can't see any aspect of anything going on in here. This is all hidden from the DAST. So expectations of it, it's essentially to see what kind of vulnerabilities you can get into if you are an attacker or if you are a malicious actor. Yeah, does that make sense? I can draw way more boxes and visual aids.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's a good one.
Sweet.
Code analysis obviously can happen in a couple of different ways, and I guess one of those things that I've had customers say to me, is like, boy, but that takes some time. So
Yes.
what are I guess how can you really make that process as quick as it can be with DAX?
Sure.
Because that is one question that I had for it.
Yeah, so you gotta know. Well, let me say it this way. DAS used to have a pretty bad reputation. Like, I'm not gonna lie to you. Because it was really, really slow. So in the olden days, where people released software on a waterfall last month, yeah, 5 minutes ago. Where people release software on a waterfall method, a DAS would probably be run toward the end of the software development lifecycle. It would take potentially like a day, right? Or at least several hours. Sometimes it would take a couple days to run the whole thing. But since it was a waterfall method, that wasn't that big of a deal, right? You could accommodate for that in the building of software. But now people are doing things like agile, they're doing things like DevOps, which is even faster than agile. And if you have an agile sprint, like an average 2-week sprint, you can't afford to have like at the very end of your sprint to take 2 to 3 days to run a DAST on your stuff. That's insane. Like that doesn't make sense. And even more so in DevOps, we have customers that release software hundreds of times a day. Like you cannot have that amount of time. What I will say is that DASTs are getting much faster. And also you can do things like now you can put DASTs into CI/CD pipelines and scope them appropriately. You can scope them with HAR files. You can scope them by like the type of technology. You can scope like that you want to actually scan. You can scope them by like different segments of your application. So DASTs are also, they're getting a lot faster. And one other thing that's actually really cool that we're doing here at Bright, and I'm not sure if anyone else is doing this. If they are, that's also really sweet. But we're actually integrating DAST scanning in at the unit testing level. So you can start writing your unit tests and then scan each individual piece of code before you even integrate it into the rest of your application, which is freaking sweet.
Yeah.
They do take a little tiny bit longer than regular unit tests, which is we're trying to get a lot better at that. Like, so normally a unit test will run like lickety split, right? Runs super fast. For us, because we have to boot up our DAST engine, it'll take about 30 seconds to a minute to run a test. But at the end of the day, if you're testing that soon in the software development lifecycle, 30 seconds to a minute to find and remediate a vulnerability is still pretty solid, especially considering, if you have a test suite with maybe 20 tests, okay, that's 20 minutes, but that's better than 3 days at the end of a release cycle.
So
So
then I guess with micro segmentation of applications now, so what you're saying is that an app developer could then maybe just take care of their own application while
Mhm.
developing it with DAST,
Mhm.
and then kind of contribute it to the greater whole once you put that in with a sprint.
Yeah,
That's
exactly. So, which is really cool. Like I think that a lot of DAST tools and a lot of security tools in general are doing this whole thing called shifting left, which essentially means we want to put these tools in the hands of developers and then the people that are building the software much sooner, as opposed to having the AppSec team come in toward the end and essentially kind of mess with everybody's stuff, as it were. So it's really exciting. And I'm curious, Aubrey, from you. So, like I said, with DAST, it used to have a pretty bad reputation because it was super slow. WAFs also had a bad reputation because they claim to essentially give you this security, and a lot of people were like, no, they don't. Like it's a total false sense of security. Like there's false positives, things get in that shouldn't get in all the time. Like it's gnarly. So what's your answer to that now?
So that is kind of the beginning of WAF. We used to hear that a lot at F5, saying, it's really complicated to, sit down and figure out how to develop a policy once my application's already in place. So you want me to turn on this new security software and mitigate, 20 billion false positives before I even, before I even know what's happening or what kind of traffic is flowing into my application. That really has been the past of WAF, and you ended up with back in as you said, the olden days, right? You ended up with a lot of false positives, right? So there was just everything's blocked. In fact, I took a look at a community message today where someone was saying, "Look, I turned on my my web app firewall, and everything's blocked now. I don't know what to do." Well, that's because of improper policy building. And you don't want to start with the most advanced portion first, right? I mean, you wouldn't go ahead and do an engine transplant if you were just learning how to change your oil. That's not, that's not what you want to do. So for the most part, the thing that's cool with WAF these days is you have a number of different places where you can actually inject that web app firewalling, and you can determine how much you get where. So also back in the day, we used to kind of shy away from this idea of a security onion for a while, because you had a lot of people that were saying, well, defense in depth is actually expense in depth, right? I don't want to just spend and spend and spend and spend. But what we have found is with a distributed WAF policy or placement, you end up actually spending less and not getting all these false positives. And how is that done? Well, if you can cut off a lot of what I consider the garbage with a low-level WAF at the very front as traffic comes into your environment before it even hits your environment. In our F5 distributed cloud is where we're doing a lot of that today. So it's out there. You get all of the signatures and stuff taken off the top that we just know it's garbage. You get the most common bots and things like that taken off the top. We know that's garbage also. Everything that's left could then be handled by a much more intelligent and smaller web app firewall at a perimeter. And then even on down further where you can WAF at the app server level with something like Nginx App Protect. That's something that, if we are using a SIM, which as a good security practitioner, I hope all of you out there have a SIM in your environment that you're contributing to, right? But if you have an application server firewall, web app firewall that's contributing to a SIM, and your perimeter is also contributing to the same SIM, and your cloud WAF is also contributing to that same SIM, you know exactly what your traffic looks like at every step of the way, and you have a lot less false positives and a lot less spend. So yes, that's it. It has changed quite a bit in the past, really couple of years especially for F5, but in the entire WAF industry, it's changed.
Was there like a particular reason that it changed other than like maybe an uproar of like this doesn't work, like you guys need to fix it?
Well, honestly, I think what changed it is really microsegmentation of applications again. It's like, as we move into this new kind of Kubernetes area of technology, you're looking at everything is so small and agile. It's hard to put a big honking, very complicated firewall in there as well. And as you guys said, after the fact, right? That's not when you want to get it done. It's during, like, so building your policies, as you guys said, the same kind of thing. If your application developers are taking a look at their DAST, right, they should also be understanding of what a WAF picks up as a default policy. So that's just, again, good security practices.
That's actually really interesting. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, that was it. I was just gonna say,
Okay.
that's it. Really, like cloudification of all this stuff really is, I guess, the answer, right? Because
Yeah.
when people go out and they put up something in Google, or they put up something in Azure, they put up something in AWS, there's a little checkbox that says Web App Firewall, and they don't know whether
Mhm.
that's good or bad. They just know it says Web App Firewall, and don't even really know it's covered. So
Mhm.
once we started seeing that, then it becomes difficult for our DASTs to understand what's actually there as they're scanning web app firewalls. Then it's very difficult for any sort of unification when you have applications that exist in AWS, Azure, and GCP, which is something that we see all the time now. So really, what's your firewall policy when your app exists with 3 different web app firewalls? You don't have
Yes.
consistency. So that's what's made this evolution, I think, in web app firewalling recently. It's really the way that apps have changed.
Interesting. Okay, that makes perfect sense. With DAST, it's sort of a similar thing. Like it was a little more like it's sort of 6 of one, half a dozen of the other, right? Like so we had this different ways of software being built, and the software itself was different. And that's kind of what we saw as a big miss in the market is that DAST were just taking so long, and we figured, it's better to have a DAST that works well, like a DAST that isn't just gonna really mess with your stuff, as opposed to people just stop using DAST. Because that's what we were also seeing is people were just not using it anymore because it was completely obsolete. But DAST is very powerful, and you don't want to not use it. But my God, if it takes 2 to 3 days off your development time, forget it. It's insane.
Oh yeah, and even funnier, I can't even imagine, like, our customers back in the day would have an attack or whatever. They'd go through their upgrade process, and then they'd check their web app firewall for all this new stuff and start going through that. and then they're going to scan the application afterwards. Like the web app firewall portion is going to take, a day, and then the DAST portion scanning is going to take, my customers did it overnight. They would just say, okay, I'm going to set it and just scan the heck out of this thing, because my customers had massive applications, and it would take, like you said, it would take a long time. So by that time, like you said, you lose time. So I think we need these new technologies, and I think we've needed the new applications to force these technologies to become better and faster. And
Yeah, I mean, as the tech evolves, the tools have to evolve with it. Like, imagine trying to work on like a brand new Mercedes with like, I don't know, some kind of really obsolete auto tool or just tool in general. I'm drawing a blank. I'm like, well, I'm trying to think of an old an old automobile. My first thought is like a plow and a hoe, but those are totally different experiences.
Tractor. John
Okay,
Deere.
modern farming without tractors. That would be insane. So,
Although,
uh,
we're starting to see things like, and this may be a little bit of a tangent, but we are starting to see modern farming with those kinds of needs as well. Micro segmented farms that exist with 5G towers instead of
yeah.
Wi-Fi, to pilot drones and things like that. Um, I do think that in the future, even, especially large scale farms are going to need
Mhm.
technologies exactly like DAST and WAF to make sure that, why? I mean, if you've got a drone army that's responsible for keeping your fences operational and for understanding what your soil temperature is, every square foot and whatnot, and moisture levels and that sort of thing, you are going to have APIs, and you're going to
Yes.
have developed code. You're going to need to scan those API endpoints, and you're going to need to defend those API endpoints. So,
Yeah.
you know, true.
It's so true. Like the APIs are eating the world. And that actually brings me to a question that we had in the Q&A. So let me go ahead and go to that. Um, the question was, is authentication to access an API endpoint enough to prevent being abused? This is a really good question. What other strategies can we use? The Oracle did a great answer, which I'll read out loud right now. She goes, "Hi, Osway, that's not enough. We want to harden the API via secure coding, security testing, DAST or pen test, code review, putting an API gateway in front of it, and there's more, but there would be a really good deployment." So yeah, it's like with these APIs, I mean, I've seen some modern farm equipment and just like stuff that we think is of this old school that is just the most advanced stuff I've ever seen. And I mean, if you can't just you can't, like the Oracle said, you can't just authenticate your APIs and be like, okay, that's good. So we have all these suggestions from the Oracle. So again, that's secure coding, security testing, code review, and putting an API gateway in front of it. But how do you think, Aubrey, that like a WAF would fit into this?
Oh, that's an awesome question, actually. So, with the authentication question in specific, this is one that I've had to face more than a few times. Um, just because you have something that's authenticated doesn't mean that authentication engine can't be abused. Two instances that I can think of off the top of my head. One, I worked with a customer that was building something with Active Directory, and an attacker had figured out that essentially they were doing a directory search across a very large directory. This is a huge, huge employer, and when you have some sort of tool that's going to expose an X500 directory like AD or LDAP, and you get something, a web application that is going to do a search against that, well, that takes up a lot of resources. So somebody can actually exhaust your API and essentially shut it down
Mm.
by asking your authentication mechanism for something it doesn't expect.
What?
So yeah, so if you're looking to do, if let's say you figure out that you can put specific directories within the Active Directory, appended to the name or whatnot, you can have all kinds of wreak all kinds of havoc and make sure that that authentication is super tied up and then can't serve any more customers. Or another example would be SAML, right? So SAML is not just your average, your average authentication mechanism. We're talking about tokenization, not just a username and password, but also proving that, hey, this place is good with me, so you can federate me here. right? So that's kind of what SAML is doing. So both of those things I've seen abused heavily in applications. Now, the thing that was in common with both of them, neither one of those customers, the application developers, had no clue that they were under attack. They didn't know why the application was performing slowly, because man, in the lab it just works. It's so fast, it's quick, and no issues. But you get a hacker at it who's figuring out how to search directories, that is going to shut things down pretty easily. So a web app firewall, how that would fit in, very simply, a couple of different ways. Number one, if you have say a signature-based WAF, that's the easiest piece to get going. If you have maybe a specific signature that is saying, Active Directory, for instance, we're looking for this signature, that signature, and that other signature, right? We're going to evaluate for those things, and if we match, we're going to block that traffic. And we can actually block that traffic for a long period of time, or block that IP address, add them to a deny list, whatnot. But more importantly, the better way to do it is when a web app firewall is appropriately configured to understand your application over time. We have per URI understandings of what should be a request size-wise and what should be a response size-wise. We have a certain number of times that a client can hit from the same IP address. Things like that. We have JavaScript that we can run to make sure that we have a human. Things like that are all in front of the application at that point. So, we're able to patch those things really quickly, especially if we have an advanced web app firewall that does have an understanding of the application. Now, for me, though, what I don't understand, of course, is the opposite side of that. Once we have identified that and shut things off, I think there's a tendency for customers, from what I've seen, at least, my customers are typically network folks, and they just sort of forget about it. So, okay, well, it's blocked. That's blocked. So not my problem anymore. So same question to you, Akira. What then happens once we've figured this out and we've got blocked traffic? What then would a DAST do to correct the issue?
Sure, that's a really good question. How would DAST correct that issue? So at the end of the day, the DAST is sort of like our Oracle, right? It shows us the way. It shows us what's wrong. And if it's a good DAST, it'll also show us like how to fix it. So maybe you still are running DAST scans on your application. You can also do things like you can add DAST to a WAF approved list of endpoints. The Oracle just spoke to this a little bit ago. And kind of use the two in tandem. But the way that really what would happen is you would run a DAST tool against your application, even if there's a WAF in front of it and some traffic is being blocked. And you would be able to see the vulnerabilities that still exist in your application. And then it's up to the developers then, or the AppSec team and the developers together to fix those problems. So it's not like the DAST itself can go in and fix it for you. Again, it's just like our Oracle. It's our seeing eye dog, or our gazing into the abyss, as it were. And it will reveal the answers to you. But it won't actually enact them. Was that your question, Aubrey?
Absolutely. And,
Cool.
that's one of those things why, at least from what I've seen over here at F5, we always talk about making sure that there's a synergy between your networking teams, which, again, largely are F5 customers, and the application developers, because it's not over. I mean, once we've blocked that thing, you need to use your DAST to figure out how to fix that code on the back end. Because ultimately, your firewall is going to stop that traffic for a while, but hackers are smart. They keep poking. They don't just go away most of the time. We see them try, and when they're, thwarted, they try again. They retool, and not, you don't see a whole lot of hackers out there who are good that have one trick. They have an entire
they
bag
have
of
a
tricks.
ton of stuff they can do. Yeah. That's gosh, it's kind of a side note. It reminds me, I read an article yesterday in the LA Times about scamming and like cryptocurrency scams and like phishing scams, catfishing scams that people were being like actually trafficked into doing. Like this is something I think that I didn't really realize or don't often think about as I'm like here in my like cushy nice office or whatever, like getting paid money to like do this, is that the people that we're trying to defend against are genuinely like huge crime syndicates. Like this is not like a random person in their basement. Like so you talk about people having tricks. Not only do they have tricks, they have people power behind this. Like they really do. And it's quite sad how they get those people. It's definitely it's deeply messed up. And that's something I think we need to remember. It's like you can't just set it and forget it with any of this stuff because these people that are trying to get money from other people or trying to scam other people, they're not going to rest. So like, why should we, right? Which is, I think, why it's so important to do things like have a WAF, but also like run periodic DAST scans, like put everything in your CI/CD pipeline. Like when our company, when we find a new vulnerability, we'll have usually within 24 to 48 hours, like some kind of test for it, right? So like people are always finding new stuff. They're always looking for new and improved ways to like mess with you, and you got to keep on top of that. And that's why I feel like it's such a bummer that there usually can be such animosity between the AppSec and development teams, or the networking and development teams, because I mean, this is serious stuff. These are these
Oh, yeah.
are these are real assets that we're trying to protect, and even on the other side, these are real people that are potentially being trafficked or abused in order to do these things. So I don't know. I that kind of was a sobering article. I know it's a little bit of a tangent, but it definitely kind of reminded me a lot more of the human aspect of what we do. It's not just hanging out in rooms and being like, haha, DAST and WAF, this is better. It's like, no, this is like real stuff.
Well, and obviously, I've spoken to you about this in the past, but for me, truthfully, these are two technologies that I think are absolutely necessary. As someone who's been pitching AppSec for a very long time, and feeling like we were alone. I mean, God, in our company, when the world was paying attention to next gen firewalls, and you have some of these next gen firewall companies saying you don't need a WAF because you have a next gen firewall. Oh my God, no, you need. And I had a friend at a next gen firewall company who hit me up and said, what what does a WAF do different than our next gen firewall? Why is that a necessity? Why do people think they need this thing? And the answer is pretty interesting. One of the things is you have to be able to profile an application over time. And like I said, understand exactly per URI what it is. And for those that don't know what a URI is, it's, let's say, the URL. I think most people know www.yada.com, right? The URI is the rest of the stuff after that, right? So, or the path, as some people call it. So per URI, statistics on what's expected on every single request and receive. That is something that is necessary. But another one of those things that I said as that I said to this guy as a necessity for a good WAF, right? Because that's a difference. You can have a checkbox WAF. You can have a bare minimums. You can have 17 pieces of flair for anyone that gets that reference. But you're much better off if you have something that is also integrated with DAST. And that really truthfully is something that we have said for a very long time. When we purchased ASM, which is the predecessor to our AWAF product, I think it was called Magnifier, actually, back in the day, when in the 90s, really, like when we were looking at this thing. And Magnifier had scan tools to build policy from. So we just continued with that kind of thing. And we've tried to make sure that if somebody has a generic scan tool, that they can take the results of that, export it to XML usually there, or CSV is another thing that we will work with as well. And then create a policy from that DAST, so you don't have to do all the crazy policy building and mitigating a million false positives and such. When you're direct integrated between these two technologies, and when your DAST and your WAF are working together hand in hand, those are the most secure shops that I see. Those are the web monsters out there. They all have these two technologies, all of them. So, but that is an imperative integration
Yeah.
between the two and understanding your application over time.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say even adding more tools like SaaS is always good to have, right? Like just not even necessarily stopping it at those two. And I do want to have a little bit of a conversation about like what else we could include. And we have like a bunch of questions. So maybe let's hop over to the chat and kind of see what people are asking. We've had the Oracle doing a great job of answering some of them, but there's one, especially in the Q&A, that I want to get your opinion on, Aubrey. So here it is. Are we ready? Okay.
Yes.
Susan McReynolds asked, we've seen a huge uptick in LFI attacks versus cross-site scripting, which used to be the predominant attack vector for our retail customers. Any insight or ideas as to why it's suddenly, since the beginning of the year, so popular? Rush to deploy new tech without input testing, etc. Looking for some hypothesis. So sorry, really quick, LFI, for those of you who don't know, it stands for local file inclusion. And that's when a hacker tricks an application into giving it access to the files on the web server. So go ahead, Aubrey. Sorry to cut you off there.
Yeah, no, that's okay. It's funny. As far as why insight, it's so hard to understand the insight. We run, so our F5 Labs team runs some scanners along the internet backbone to try and pick up and understand what the most used hack utilities are out there right now. And by CVE, we also try to make sure that we understand what's out there. And I'll tell you what, the most popular CVEs being hit right now are from 2018 and 2019. So it's like, these back in the past kind of attacks, they're still there and they're still open. Now, as far as local file inclusion, though, this reminds me of there was a time maybe 10 years ago when directory traversal was the exact thing we're talking about here. Like, it's directory traversal, and it was a popularized thing because by default, NT servers, not to pick on any particular server vendor, sorry, Microsoft, but NT servers for a while came default with these directories open. And so a hacker could really just, I mentioned the URI before, so you would include path in there, and if your root directory of your your Microsoft web services were like C:/XYZ, you just .. / and then program. Like, I mean, you can expose the server itself with a directory traversal attack. Now, why local file inclusion? I think it's also because of exactly what I mentioned before, the trivialization of applications, right? We're able to bring them up anywhere. But here's the quick question. When we bring an application up somewhere, let's say a developer goes out to the cloud and says, I want to bring up this cool container thing that does something, and I'm going to bring it up in Google Cloud. And they do that, pow, they bring up a container. Well, what's that container? Are you sure that that container is locked down tightly, or is it something that's just easy to use? Well, I can tell you that I've talked to a lot of developers out there who will just use the first Ubuntu container that they see out there in their cloud provider. They don't check it. They don't take the time to scan it, to do the due diligence, the full. And the security teams oftentimes don't have the time or understanding that those things are even there. Boy, I've worked with customers that they didn't even know that their developers had a huge lab environment in a public cloud provider, much less that was a massive security threat. So yeah, I really do. I think it's just because we have these utilities, they're common, and I don't think they're fully patched. So I think that, as far as local files, I think hackers are really picking up on that.
That's really tough. Yeah, I wish I had a take, because I honestly have no idea. So I'm really glad that you had some tips and hints on that. Susan, I hope that answers your question, or if you have any follow-up questions, feel free to put them in the chat or in the Q&A. Okay, cool. She says, very helpful. Awesome. Right on. Okay, let's see what else we got. If there's any other questions. All right, I'm just gonna kind of scroll up to the top. The Oracle had a thing she wanted us to mention, which is you can use Bright, which is the DAST scanner we're talking about today, to test an API. What you do is you upload your API schema file, which is like the open API or the Swagger file, and it will scan it. And you can edit your definition while inside Bright to ensure it's in the right format for testing, which is pretty cool. The first time I saw that, I was like, no way. It's like a little security linter on your APIs, which is pretty sweet. Let me see. Someone asked, do you support WebSockets in DAST? Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Aubrey.
I was just going to say, actually, like, that's a really great point. To It would be very, very nice to see, build WAF policy from Swagger, if F5 product development folks are listening.
Oh, is that a thing that you can do?
Oh, well, hey, why not? That's what I'm saying. We probably ought to push for that sort of thing, right? It's because if I can get it from a DAST scan output, if I can build policy from that, I can build an API protection policy very easily from Swagger. I mean, obviously, but it would be very nice to be able to do that with a full WAF policy as well, if I
That'd be
had
dope.
my wishes.
Here's a question for you, Aubrey, too. This is a WAF question. So here we go. How can a WAF protect when there's a 0 day being exploited in the wild?
That's an awesome question, and this is like cheating for me, because of who I work for. One thing that makes our WAF a little bit different is this lovely thing called iRules, which allows you to pick apart traffic at layer 7 and change literally anything. I mean, I've changed packet payload from very bizarre FTP streams, you know, um, and that is typically how F5 has stopped that. As far as typical WAFs, as far as, let's say, checkbox WAF, for instance, anyone who's secure in their public cloud WAF that's out there, 0 day, you're not going to stop that. It's just not going to happen. But I can tell you that, if you want to try to do something like that, probably the best bet would be to take a bot defense that is updated all the time. That's going to, our bot defense, for instance, is updated every 5 minutes. I think a lot of other bot packages are very similar. And at least there you will be protected from the automated threats that are out there trying to execute the 0 day stuff. And if you take the automated garbage off the top, like I say, take the garbage off the top. That's
Mhm.
the easiest way to do that, because without taking the garbage off the top, you're going to be watching log files stream by as your attacker is just taking whatever they want.
Yeah.
So that's it. When you cut the garbage off, you can actually see what the attacker is doing, and then you can try and mitigate or honeypot or whatever you want to do. Now, again,
Tell me. Oh,
I
go ahead.
rules. I
Uh-huh.
was going to say I rules. That's another thing. So typically, if you look at Dev Central, our user community, right? Shameless plug. We have a million 0 day I rules out there that have stopped things that were supposedly impossible. The most famous one is probably the THC SSL handshake DOS. So that one is legendary because that was something that OpenSSL said would not be fixable for 8 months. We had it
Hmm.
fixed in under 8 hours.
Hmm. Dang.
But we were the only web app firewall vendor that did, because of iRules. So
Here's something that just popped into my head. This is like a little bit tangential, but I want us to kind of like go back and forth on it a little bit. Um, and then Crystal, we'll get to your question in just a moment. So I recently read this amazing article. It was a write-up by a man named Guillermo Rambo, I believe is his name. He discovered a bug that allowed for this is crazy, for Mac OS devices to have apps that could listen to you via AirPods and Beats Studio head, like your little headsets. And it was only through those two things. It wouldn't be for like just a regular like, any Bluetooth headset, which was interesting to me. And do he didn't find this on purpose, right? He just was like working on something else and then was like, wait a second, like I'm seeing a lot of hexadecimal in my terminal when I'm speaking. This is incorrect. Like, why is there unencrypted sound files happening? Um, but anyway, so what I want to say is like, what about those kind of goofy just misconfigurations that a WAF and a DAS can miss, right? Because they're not like necessarily like a cross-site scripting issue. It's like some weird hardware issue, and it's like how do you reconcile this? Like how do we do all this tooling? We have all these layers, and still there's problems where someone accidentally misconfigured a daemon incorrectly, and now Siri can listen to me when I'm not talking to Siri.
it's funny, you're always going to go after the unknown. And actually, and Crystal, I see your question there too. I'll get to that in a moment. But Sarah, your question is absolutely related to what Akira was just saying. The outbound threats, right? So for the unknown, that's one of those things. Can you configure a WAF to scan the outbound stuff? Well, that's normal data leakage protection stuff that is very, very typical for next gen firewalls and whatnot. But I will tell you this, one of the things that we typically do in our configurations is we don't typically put a WAF policy on there, but what we will do is we will utilize deny lists for outbound traffic. So, and those deny lists are typically populated with known CNC servers, right? If you've got command and control stuff out there that's known, which, our IP intelligence package is what we typically refer to. That's something that can be updated on any of our devices, or Nginx, same thing, right? So if you've got outbound packets from any of, F5 or Nginx stuff, yeah, you're going to be able to filter out any sort of attempt to get to known hacker utilities. So for the unknown, Sarah, the answer to your question, I think, is really a great one to cut down on the unknown that you asked about, Akira.
Totally. Yeah.
And real quick,
go ahead.
if I could touch on crystals for a second.
Yeah, sure.
Right. So you asked about the Silverline specifically. So is it possible to WAF a specific URI, but not a whole FQDN? Absolutely, you can do that. And in terms of Silverline, it really boils down to your policy. If you wanted to hit me up, feel free. I'm on Twitter, Aubrey King F5, at Aubrey King F5, of course. And I'm happy to help you dive into that a little bit more. I don't want to spend the entire time on that one.
What's your Twitter handle? Aubrey King F5?
At Aubrey King F5.
Awesome. Cool. Right on. Crystal, welcome to AppSec. I'm also relatively new. I've been doing it for a little less than a year. So we're in this together. We're all learning at the same time. It's great.
Oh, and Taj wondering what the difference is AWS managed WAF versus F5 WAF. So real quick, that's also, managed WAF is going to be typically, they have the checkbox WAF and they have the ability to maybe look at your policy. But the thing that's interesting for me, I've had a couple of customers that have explored that, and what they came down to is really they don't really know all the WAF stuff. In my opinion, I mean, it is, it's a minimum sort of viable product, and that is what AWS is shooting for, something that's going to be effective. They can be turned on right now, and they're the best in the world at doing that, for sure. But your good hackers have gotten around a lot of that stuff, and really you're finding that and we're not the only advanced WAF out there. There are other WAFs out there that do similar things, right? There are choices, but to me, I would just say that checkbox WAF is the one to get away from.
It's interesting that you kind of keep coming back to that thing of hey, don't do the easiest possible option, because it's not actually that. In the WAF world, it's still the false sense of security.
Yeah. It's for emergency use only, right? I mean, really, if that's what's there and that's the only thing between the hacker and your app, turn it on. Absolutely, turn it on.
Yeah, but it's like having a house and you're like, okay, put one window in.
That's right. We only need one way in or out. All the air comes in through one portal.
Yes. Oh my God. All right,
really,
we have about
there are better ways.
There are definitely better ways, for sure. I want to just do one last call for questions because we have about 5 minutes left. So let's just see if there's any things in the chat. I'm also Aubrey. Your thing again. One last time was Aubrey King F5 at Twitter. Yep. Do you have a LinkedIn, Aubrey?
I do. Aubrey King.
Aubrey King. Okay, cool. All right. Let's see here. I'm just gonna type this out so I can share my screen in a second, and then people can take a picture of how to reach us. All right, let's see here. Yeah, okay. So there's also two communities that you can join, which are amazing. The first one is the Bright Discord server. We're working on building that up, and it's a lot of fun. We like share memes and we talk about how to use Bright. We talk about DAST. We talk about all kinds of things, cybersecurity. Also, the We Hack Purple community is amazing. It's free and it has a ton of free courses about AppSec and things related to AppSec, and that is at wehackpurple.com. Would love to have you join us at one or both of those. The links for those are in the chat. Thank you very much to the Oracle. And yeah, you can follow Aubrey on Twitter at Aubrey King F5. I don't have Twitter because I turn into someone I don't like on Twitter, so I just don't use it. I use it way too much when I do use it. So I have a LinkedIn. I'll put my thing in here. Here we go. Here, da, 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 da. It's just linkedin.com/accurate brand, which is great. Yeah, so we'd love to reach out to you and talk to you.
Definitely. And I did want to, just the idea of purple that brought me up to something I know I wanted to touch on for this. I wanted to
Oh
make sure
yeah.
that everyone understood that these two technologies are not red or blue. That these two technologies should be considered purple always. And I only say that because you think of a web app firewall as, hey, this is a web app firewall. It is definitely, going to be just for stopping traffic. But I have seen hackers that use web app firewalls to develop an outbound proxy to put in front of an application so that they can just run normal traffic at it and understand exactly what that application is doing underneath. So if you are good at web app firewalls, you can use that for terrible, terrible purposes. And by that
Yes.
same token, anyone who is good with a scanner can also pummel an application and really do some things that you're not supposed to do to that application. I was actually talking to Akira about using an open source application that comes default with a particular Linux standard, and you can shut things down with that. I've had to utilize that for very large attack traffic in simulations before.
Yeah, that's a good point because like if I can point a DAST at my website, and get results on where the vulnerabilities are, literally anyone can point a DAST at your website and get information about where the vulnerabilities are. So it behooves us to really use both of these technologies because I mean, especially for DAST, anyone can. So it's sort of like not putting locks on your doors. Like anyone can just walk up to your door and just push it open, right? Like you might as well put the lock on it because it's so easy to break in otherwise. If it's not, again, it's not like hiring a full-blown pen tester. It's not like the most in-depth, extreme thing you can possibly do. However, it's let's get the low-hanging fruit, right? Let's make sure that the doors are locked. There's actual glass on the windows with locks on it. Let's put a little security system on, and then later we can hire like a consultant to tell us, oh yeah, your basement windows are actually kind of insecure or whatever it is, right? I just bought a house, so I'm all about like house analogies right now. So yeah. One last thing I just wanted to share. Again, I literally just made this in the past 5 seconds, so I'm going to share my screen here and just put our contact info. It's beautiful. This is probably the best slideshow I've ever made. So, yeah, if you want to reach out to us, feel free to do so there. And Aubrey, any last thoughts as we wrap up today?
No, honestly, I just had such a blast talking to you. I'm glad that we did this, and I'd love to do it again anytime you guys need help with WAF stuff. I love talking about it.
Yeah, this was amazing. Like I'm also really glad that we're both musicians because I feel like we had kind of a chance to sort of riff, you know what I mean?
Yes.
Yeah, for
Right.
sure. For sure, for
Yeah.
sure. All right, cool. Well, everyone, thank you so much for your time. Abhay, thank you so much for your compliment. I really deeply appreciate that. That's very kind of you. Actually, I'm going to take a picture of it later and just, use it for remind myself if I ever feel down, I'll be like, Abhay's on my side. So I appreciate that. That's amazing. Okay. Well, I guess that's it, y'all. We'll stay on for like a couple more seconds here just to say goodbye, but again, everyone, thank you for coming. This now concludes our webinar on WAF versus DAST. I hope we've all convinced all of you to use both as often as humanly possible, and don't both and whenever you can, and don't just do the little check mark that says, do the easiest way out. And yeah, thank you again, everyone, for coming, and you're welcome. And thanks for the energy, and thank you for the questions. And this was wonderful. So have a good day, everyone. And I'm going to go ahead and stop my share, and we're going to end the webinar right here. Thank you, Aubrey, and thank you, Tanya. Thank you, the Oracle.